Okay, hello everybody. This is LS256. I'm Dr. Simon Aristigira, and today we're going to talk about information need. In this figure here, what it shows is that when we think of information, we may be thinking about data, information, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. But actually, when we see numbers or strings of characters or symbols without any context, that's how we define data. It can be points, they can be numbers, they can be zeros and ones, but we cannot make any meaning out of it. That's what we call, data. Then, when we go one step further, and we can understand what those the data means, because it has a context. Then this is what we define as information. Okay. The next step up the ladder is knowledge, and knowledge is information that we have acquired and we have processed and is part of our own beings. So we're able to apply the information. That is what is called knowledge. In this case, the next step is understanding, and then wisdom. Uh, and I guess wisdom is when you can apply your knowledge to the future. So if we see the triangle here, we say that data, information, and knowledge is comprehension, and understanding and wisdom is application. This is one way to see this data, information, knowledge continuum. Uh, for me, personally, I see it as three steps: data, information, and knowledge. So so when we have an information need, and that's what we're going to talk today about that, what it means is that uh, we want to be able to address that need, and it refers to this second step. In information science, we people who work in information science and library science have been trying to develop tools to share knowledge, to record and share knowledge. So far, it's been a very difficult task, because what we share, what we can storage, what we can access and retrieve is information. As I said, knowledge requires, I think, a deep uh, uh, thinking process. But it would be great if we could share knowledge. For example, one example, let's say we see a video of a doctor performing a surgery. Well, we can see the video, and he's sharing, how to do it. He's sharing the information, his know-how. However, it will be very hard for somebody who is not trained in surgeries to perform a surgery just by watching a video. Okay, the success rate will be very low. So what we try to what but that's what we are trying to achieve, and maybe in the future we will be able to share and record and storage, then access and retrieve knowledge. But for now, at this moment, I think we must concentrate in information. That's why our field is called library and information science. Okay, now what is an information need? An information need is something that somebody needs to know. Okay, so the information need is self defined. So when you want to know something, you have an information need. And that brings us to the next slide. So this is what they call, and this is from the textbook, a pathway from information seeking behavior. So we have that, they don't call it a need, but I would call it an information need. We have the impetus here. We want to know something, okay? And we have to, I would say, two opposite processes. The first one is you have a knowledge deficit. In other words, you don't know about something and you want to know, okay, that you want to know, but you don't have any information. So you feel that you have a deficit in terms of knowledge and information. On the other side, we have an information desire. We just want to know something because we want to know, okay? And then we may have a question, and we have an information need, and by chance. From there, we go to the second or third step down called in the box, know. So what do we know? We may have an idea. We may have a lot of information and even knowledge about what we are exploring, but we may not know anything. Of course, when we don't know anything, it becomes harder then to find and to access the information sources. Further down, we have external motivation and internal motivation. And in external motivation, what is defined as when somebody asks you to find an information. It may be your professor, it may be a family member, or it may be your boss if you are in a job situation. You are required to learn and to access an information because you are being told to do so, and that's a very normal situation. We may also have an internal motivation. Because we want to know something because we feel like, okay, I want to know more about this or that, and both in both cases are also very normal and common processes. One is derived from an external motivation and one from an internal motivation. Okay, so that's what you want to know. And then you will come to the almost to the last step here, which is an initial discovery. And this initial discovery again can be very you may be aware already about some facts and about some information, and you may have some knowledge that will make it easier to understand this initial discovery because you already have that experience. But it may be something totally new for you, and then the initial discovery is hard to grasp, it's hard to comprehend. If you, and I'm sure you have done it because we all do it, if you get into any new subject or any new field, it doesn't have to be an academic one. It can be of if you want to learn how to cook, for example, or how to repair a car, or how to repair something in your house, or how to work in the computers, etc., etc. There are many examples that we go through life, and for us, it's an initial discovery with no prior experience, and it becomes very hard, very, very, very hard indeed, to get that information and to be able to understand that information, to absorb that information, to process that information, so it becomes knowledge. Remember the first slide. So the information is there, but you haven't processed it. You haven't absorbed it. It's not still a part of you. And that takes time, and that takes effort, and that takes practice, okay? Another very interesting phenomenon in this model, and this is a model of information-seeking behavior. There are other models too of information-seeking behavior, which means how people search for information, acquire information, and process that information, and maybe disseminate that information. So information-seeking behavior is defined as the process in which humans search for information. Okay, so this is a model that is what we call in science a construct, which means that it's made with it arises of by by one or two scholars who have studied how people search for information. So it has arise from research. Okay. Well, one thing that is very interesting in this model is the last or the last boxes: denial, confirming, and unfamiliar. And I was thinking about denial, and uh, I was thinking about an example, and I remember a couple of months ago when the moon landing was being commemorated. Some people still believe that it was a hoax, that there was no moon landing, and maybe it was something filmed in Hollywood. Okay, that never happened. So you can read all the information that you like, but still you deny that information. Also, if you like to smoke cigarettes, maybe you still think that cigarettes are bad for you, or vaping. And there is a big controversy now going on with vaping, and you read information about if it's harmful or not to your health, but you still keep on doing because you don't believe it, and that happens to everybody. It's not a it's very common to once you have a belief to change that belief. Another output, I would call it outputs, is confirming. So what you read is confirm what were your belief about the subject, and this is very pleasant because then you feel good about yourself because information that you found is confirms what you were thinking about a subject. Another outcome will be that you're total unfamiliar, and maybe you want to try to get more information about it, so it becomes you become more familiarized with that information. But the idea here is that this is a process for which we go through in order to address our information needs. Okay. Now, this is very interesting too, and it has to do with our schoolwork. And this is a progression from factual question to a research question, because there are many information needs that are made out of facts. And so, if you like to play trivia, maybe I'm sure you have searched for facts in the internet, and you learn them, or you read a book about facts, or an encyclopedia, etc., etc. That type of research is very easy to address, because you may need only one source. You may go to the internet and you find the answer very, very easily. So an example here in this table is the question: what is the magnitude of the largest earthquake ever recorded? Well, you can go, you can search in the internet, you can search, you can do a Google search, or maybe you go to the library and get an encyclopedia, and you will be able to answer that question immediately. Okay, it is an easy to answer question because it's about facts. Then the second step is when you want to compare, or not compare, when you want to have a list of things. So in this example is what are the magnitudes of the largest earthquakes ever recorded. So maybe you got a list of 10. And still it may be a single source search, or maybe a multiple source search according to these figures as a single source, and you will get 10, the 10 largest earthquakes ever recorded. And then you have addressed your information need, because you are not trying to understand the phenomenon. In this case, the phenomenon is an earthquake. What you're trying to get some facts about the phenomenon. So, what's the largest earthquake ever recorded, and what a list of largest earthquake. So, it's a different kind of question when you're just trying to get the fact, and when you're trying to understand. When you're trying to understand, things get more complicated. Okay. The third moment here and the questions and the answers are becoming harder. In other words, the answers to address your information need will become harder. It says, what is the moment magnitude scale and how does it compare to the Richter scale? Richter scale, I think it's pronounced. I'm sorry for my pronunciation. So here, the question has become more complicated because whoever has this information need is trying to compare two scales, the moment magnitude and the Richter scale. So then you need to go to several sources and see and make it. Maybe you even have to make a in a Word document. You will have to put the characteristics of the magnitude scale and the Richter scale. Because you want to compare them, okay? So in this case, the question has become harder. Now you're trying to understand more than just having a fact. Because for a fact, it's like a trivia game. They ask you what's the largest earthquake ever recorded. You want to make sure that you know. It doesn't matter how happened, why earthquakes happen, etc. It doesn't matter. You just want the fact. And the last one and the hardest to answer is, how has earthquake prediction developed and how good is it today? In order to address that research question, that has become a research question. So you need to look for several sources and maybe do a historical account of how earthquake prediction has developed and how good is it today. Okay, so in this case, the question becomes harder because you have an information need that it's more about understanding how earthquake prediction has developed through time and how accurate those predictions are today. So it's not more about facts that, the largest earthquake or the earthquake who has killed more people. No, it's about understanding a part of the phenomenon. Okay, you may have other research questions in regard to this subject or not. So the more complicated the question is and the more understanding that you want to have over a phenomenon, the research or the seeking information behavior will be also more complicated. Or not also, it will be more complicated because you need to go to several sources and you need to compare and contrast and read. And of course, when we are at the university, these are the type of questions that your professors may ask you to do a paper on. So you have a research question, and then you have to do what is called bibliographic research, because you have to investigate, you have to read, you have to go to the library or log in onto the electronic collection and search for journals and search for information sources. And then you can read your paper, and then you can write your paper, answering the question that maybe in one of your classes your professor has asked you to answer. So for every information need, there is a way to address it. And it may be very easy or it may be very, very hard. And of course, if you're doing research, collecting primary data, and then analyzing that data through statistics or qualitative methodology or grounded theory, then it becomes even harder to do, because you're studying a phenomenon, and there may be many sources out there that you can read, but still you have a theory, maybe you have a research question, maybe you have hypotheses and you want to test them. And so the addressing that information need becomes more complicated. That's the whole point. In terms of publication and in the science and in the social science and humanities, There are some. This is from your textbook. It says the scholarly publishing process. This is very interesting too, and I call it a dissemination process actually, because a researcher does research, and that researcher has several outlets on how to disseminate his or her work. One would be the one in the left side. It's through a conference proceeding. You write a paper, you submit that paper to a conference, and you go and present that paper, and then it gets published in a conference proceeding. This is very common because that's one of the ways that researchers or scholars have to validate their work in front of the scientific community. The other one is the journal article, and in the science and the social science, the 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 the, the journal is the main channel of communication among the scientific community. So you write your manuscript. It may be the same one that you took to the conference, but then you send it to a journal to be published. And what they're going to do is they're going to send it to several other experts so they can peer review your paper. And they will communicate with the editor, and the editor will communicate with you for clarification. Maybe the methodology is not well explained, or the results are skewed, or anything that these reviewers were able to find. So, why do they do that? Well, that's a measure of safety, and it's a measure of authority. That provides authority to your paper, and it's a safety measure, so that the results that you are presented are relevant and are the expected results. This is very important because this is how the scientific community has been working for the last 400 years, more or less. You have to build up science on they sell it on the shoulders of prior scientists. So in the scientific process means that it's a systematic process. It's not that you're going to do an experiment out of nothing. You have to know what has been done before, and one way to know what has been done before, or the best way, and this is especially true for science, but also for social science, is the journal article, the peer-reviewed journal article. Again, peer review means that the article has been reviewed by other experts, and they have provided feedback to you, and then it's published in a journal. How is it published? If it's electronic or printed, it doesn't matter. In many classes that you are taking, the professor will ask you, please, I would like you to answer this research question and do a bibliographic research, but I want you to look for peer-reviewed journals. So what you have to do is you have to go to the library online and access the academic database. That's how you're going to approach this. This is how that will be your information seeking behavior, because you want to have the sources with the most authority. Because we have to think about something, especially today, but it's always been the case. Many of the information that is published in the internet, in YouTube, in blogs, in social media, etc., it's published and everybody can read it. But that doesn't mean that the information is reliable. Okay, that the information is true. You can hurt yourself if you follow everything that is published in the internet. You can cause a lot of damage to yourself and to others. So it is important that when we are trying to get the best information possible to address an information need, we get that information from peer review sources. or with sources of authority. So, for example, if you want to know something about a disease or an epidemic, just don't read any blogger or any Twitter or any Facebook post or whatever. No, you go to the CDC website, and then you read the reports there, and those reports have more authority because they are written by people who know about the subject. Okay. Another way, of course, to disseminate your work or to publish your work is through books. And books are very important, especially in the social science and in the humanities. Not so much in science. And why it's not so much important in science? Because in science you need current research. And books take longer, and they are meant to be available for a longer period of time. So it takes longer to write a book, and then you have to publish the book, electronic or printed again. It doesn't matter, and it's meant to last longer. So it doesn't have current research. If you're looking for current research in science, you have to go to the journal article. But still, books are very important, and they are very essential tools if we are talking about the arts and humanities. Why? Because information doesn't change as fast as it does in the hard science. So arts and humanities are domains or fields that are more stable. Physics and chemistry and health are domains or disciplines that change rapidly. Okay, so a book, it's more tailored to addressing information needs in art and science. A conference proceeding or a journal paper works better for science. So we have those two things: books for arts and humanities, and journal articles and conference proceedings for the science. Of course, it does not mean that there are not science books. There are, and there may be about theory, and there may be more historical discoveries, more than current research. Finally, this performance or display, you can display your work in conference too, maybe a poster or any other way. And then with these three avenues of publishing, scholarly publishing, what you're trying to do is to disseminate your work, is to share your work with the community. Okay, and then of course we ask information consumers will access that information. Where do we access that information? Well, there are many channels to access that information. One channel is the library, okay? Because in the library we will find conference proceedings. We will find journal articles, books, and on any other type of display, etc., etc. So in our information seeking behavior, we're going to have access through the library. That would be the best place to find that information and address your information need. The other place, of course, is the open web. Okay, we may do a Google search, and we also might be able to address your information need. Again, I'm talking about information needs that in which you need to understand. You are not just looking for a fact. If you're looking for a fact, you don't have to go to the library and go to all the trouble logging into the digital collection and the databases just to know a fact. It's easier if you just go and Google it. In librarianship, we call it ready reference. But if you're doing more of a research question, because you're trying to understand a phenomenon, then this is the way to go. And this is another figure of what I was talking before. We have the domains here at the top: arts, humanities, social science, and science. And we can see that in order to address the information needs of arts and humanities, books are the way to go. Why? Because they are more extensive work, and their currency is longer. They last longer. Uh, but when we are in this continuum to from humanities to social science to science, then we realize that the main channel of communication is a journal article. Okay, why? Because the periodicity of a journal article, of a magazine or a scientific journal, it's they will publish 2 or 3 issues, or even more. They will publish 12 issues a year. So that means that what is published there is more current. And if they come out in electronic format, it's even better, because there are some journals that we will publish in electronic format research that has not been completed, but they will provide updates. So other members of the scientific community can read of what X or Y research group is doing. Okay, so this is I think we already talked about that. Of course, there are the seminal papers and the initial research, and these are very important, and they do last longer as information sources, because it's the first paper on a given field. In physics, for example, there are seminal papers. In information science and library science, there are seminal papers that will last forever, because they are like the first papers on that discipline. Okay, but in general, uh, uh, research that is published in journal articles uh, don't last that long. They have a life expectancy, and it's very short, because that's how science works. Social science and the hard science. Okay, then I think this is very. We all know that information may come in a physical format or digital. And when we talk about information in physical, it can be a book, it can be printed information, it can be books and magazines and newspapers and journals, etc., etc. Or it can be a painting too, or a photograph. And then we have digital information that it may be a library collection, it may be a stream, a podcast, it may be a text PDF file, HTML, etc., etc. So there are many ways where information, physical and digital, is shared and disseminated. Again, what it is important is the information itself. Okay, know if it's physical or digital. Maybe you like to read printed books in paper, are easier to read for many people. Other people like to read them in digital format. And they have a e-reader or electronic reader, and they feel very comfortable about reading. But the book, if it's the same title, will be the same. Then, in terms of information, we have 2 main categories: the primary sources and the secondary sources. And a primary source is a main text or work that you are discussing, actual data or research result, or historical documents, and also first-hand testimony. And some examples are diaries, published materials, documentaries, public opinion polls, reprinted primary sources, maps, oral histories, postcards, court records, etc. All of these are examples of primary sources, okay? And they are very powerful, because when you are reading the primary source, it's almost like getting into the head of the person who was the author of that source. So if you can read an interview, and even better, if you can listen to an interview, because maybe the interview that you're reading, it went already through the hands of the journalist, but if you can listen to the person itself, that's very powerful. Okay, and then there are secondary sources, which are very powerful too, because these are records generated by an event, but written by non-participants in the event, based on or derived from primary sources. But they have been interpreted and analyzed, which is very powerful too, because maybe you in order to understand something that happened, you need somebody to interpret or analyze a historical a social movement or something that happened historically. And some examples are encyclopedias, chronologies, fact books, biographies, monograph, dissertations, general histories, most journal articles, and most published books. So both categories of information are really important, and both serve a purpose to address an information need. And so we have to be aware of that. Then there are categories of information. Popular information, of course, we know what popular information is. Then there is more specialized information, that's scientific information, and that's the one that comes from peer-reviewed sources such as the journal article. Then it's current information, and that has to do with, for example, newspapers, magazines, etc., of current events. And finally, there is historical information that is referring to things that happened in the past. And this has to do what I was pointing out a few minutes ago about why in science the journal article is so important. If we see this figure here, we see that how, depending on the source, there is a different publication time. For example, news sources, if we listen to the radio, if we check social media, if we check Twitter, well, events that happen anywhere in the world, you can read about in seconds. Of course, that was not the case ever before in the past. But nowadays, with all the digital information that we have available, and also the information technologies and communications that we have, well, it is possible to know what is happening on the other side of the world almost immediately. Okay, there are news sources, formal news sources, like TV stations or newspapers, but nowadays we have also social media. So we have Twitter, Facebook, or Snapchat, or Reddit, whatever social media you use, and we know almost in seconds what is happening anywhere in the world. So that's immediate. Then, of course, that also has a very short period of time, because a few minutes later or seconds later, there are other news that have become important. So it is a non-ending process of getting more news sources and sources and more news. So I guess we have to be careful with that, because then we may have an information disaster, because I don't know how much information can a human take. In the past, it wasn't like that. Maybe there was an earthquake in China, let's say, and it took a week for the information to arrive here to the States. But nowadays, it's immediately. Then we have magazines, and they go more in depth about the news or what is happening in politics or in foreign policy, so they do have more understanding on they provide more insight. Let's say that like that. They provide more insight to whatever we're trying to address, to whatever information need we're trying to address. And that may take days, a month or more to get published. Then we have the journals, and depending on the on how many times a year a journal is published, then by the way, that's called periodicity. Depending on the periodicity of the journal, we may have new publications every month or every week or 3 times a year or once a year. Then we have books, and as I said, books are published and they may not be updated for a while. I know textbooks are every 2 or 3 years or 4 years. Textbooks are the authors come with a new edition of the same book, a revised revision, etc. But some books are never updated, so the information is not as current. And then we have background sources that may last for many years. By the way, all of the things that I have talked today are in your textbook. So please make sure that you're reading your textbook so you can follow this lecture. Okay, thank you so much.